Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining ASALH Richmond's second Sunday sit-in. Thank you, AARP Virginia, for partnering with us in our Sunday sit-ins. And I would like to thank the magnificent volunteers of AARP for joining us today. I want to extend a gratitude and warm hello to ASALH Richmond members and other branch members from all across the nation for joining us today. I believe I see some National Executive Board members here as well, and I would like to extend a thank you for always supporting us. The Association for the Study of African American Life and History was founded by Dr. Carter G. Woodson in 1915. ASALH Richmond was chartered in 2019. Our mission is to engage the local and national community with knowledge and learning about African American history and programs. We are so excited today to listen to a documentary and listen to our host as we talk about and talk to Teresa Ann Walker. She is a wife, a mother, an activist, a civil rights leader, and also a freedom rider. I am so excited. I am going to stop now because we want to have enough time so that we can see the documentary. One last thing, if you're not a member of ASALH Richmond, please join us and be a part of us. We will actually put the link in our chat so that you can click on and see what we're doing and our exciting things. I'll turn this now over to AARP Virginia, Ms. Belinda.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Belinda Todd, a very proud community ambassador with AARP, the Virginia State Office. Our office is located in downtown Richmond. We have a great group of volunteers, and we're always looking to welcome more people. So we know that there's some of you out there with time, many talents and skills, and we welcome you into this community. I'm excited. I'm excited to help facilitate tonight's discussion. All of you, that AARP has a long history of working with our communities, our universities, organizations, and churches. And so I'm looking forward to tonight's program, where we will be hearing from a real freedom rider, a true legend. So now back to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Belinda Todd. I guess now we are ready to show the video of our one-on-one conversation with the freedom rider, Teresa Ann Walker. She's actually the widow of Dr. and Reverend Wyatt T. Walker. And now she will let us know more about what she's done. And I just can't wait. So hold on, sit back. I hope you have some popcorn, and let's get ready to watch this.
Well, my name is Teresa Ann Walker. I live in Chester, Virginia. I'm 93 years old, and I am blessed to be able to do and care for myself as much as I can at this ripe old age. It was very special. I lived in an integrated neighborhood until about 11 years old, and then my parents decided they were going to separate, and I went to live with my grandmother in Freehold, New Jersey. When I moved to Freehold, I went to a completely black school, 4 rooms. Jersey was a completely segregated town. I went to started high school, white high school, and it was really a nightmare. The guidance counselor wanted to know, well, she just told me, you'll go in the general program, and I said, no, I want the scientific program, I'm going to college. And it was very prejudiced. I felt like a stranger. and it was a very disappointing experience. College, I went to Virginia Union. I applied to Virginia Union and Virginia State, and the Virginia Union was the first one to accept me, so that's where I went. And I loved it. And living in Freehold, there were no black professionals, and so I was wondering what on earth can I be, and I decided, walking to high school, I saw the ladies sitting in the windows typing, and I thought that was glamorous, and that's what I decided I wanted to be, a secretary. When I got to Virginia Union, I majored in accounting, and I loved it. I met my husband at the Green Tea Social as a freshman at Virginia Union University. I was sitting at the piano, and you were to introduce yourself to one another, and he came over and introduced himself, and I asked him, he said he was from New Jersey, Merchantville, New Jersey, and I told him I knew someone from Merchantville, New Jersey, and it happened to be his sister, who was at summer assembly with me, a Bible assembly that the teenagers in New Jersey could go to each summer. Dating until our sophomore year, and I always knew he was considered to be very smart, and he was personable, and so one day I asked him, he had taken me to he was a little brother, he was had pledged Alpha, and he was asked me to go to a party with him one Sunday afternoon, and I went, and that evening he asked me to go to Moore Street's Christmas service, and we went to that, and he reached over and took my hand, and then we just started dating from then on, as much dating as you could do at Virginia Union at the time. Mm-hmm. Well, we had 4 children in 5 years, and we lived in Petersburg. My husband pastored Gilfield Baptist Church in Petersburg, and he was active with the civil rights movement in Petersburg. He was president of the NAACP, he was president of CORE, and president of the Petersburg Improvement Association. When my daughter was able to go to school, eligible to go to school, she was barred from all public schools in the state of Virginia. And we sued the state of Virginia, and we lost the case because she was 6, and they said you were permitted or allowed to go to school until age 7. You're not compelled to go to school until age 7. So we lost the case. But I had been in segregated situations all my life, and I wondered what was wrong, and I felt I wish I could do something to stem the education and make this country a better place for my daughter. I knew it could be, and I wanted it to be, and I always wished I could do something. Mm-hmm. But by then we had moved to, Dr. King had asked my husband to join him in Atlanta. He was impressed with the work he was doing in Petersburg. So we moved to Atlanta, and my daughter was able to go to school. But I always wanted to help do something to make the country a better place. I knew it could be a better place. And so when my husband came home and announced he was going to be with the Freedom Riders, he was going to be a Freedom Rider, I didn't tell my husband that I wanted to go on the Freedom Rides, but I thought about it, and I said, I just have to go. And so I packed up the children and sent them to their grandparents in New Jersey, and never did tell them. They all died not knowing. Packed up all the children, sent them to New Jersey for the summer, and I knew they would be fine, and decided to go on the Freedom Ride. The Freedom Riders were a group of young people and older people also, but they decided the ICC had said that it was legal to ride the buses and to use the restrooms and whatnot. And so we said, well, we'll test it. The first bus left, the first bus was burned, set on fire, and the children were beaten in Anniston, Alabama. And then some of the buses that followed, the people were also beaten, and the hospitals wouldn't accept them, and it was just terrible. And so the organizers just said, well, nobody will go on the Freedom Riders because of all of the violence. I was trained mostly by men. I should have been trained by a woman at some point. Well, if somebody spit on you, you were not to respond. If you crossed the picket line, you were not to respond. And if somebody put out a cigarette on you, you were not to respond. And so you were trained in nonviolence. And I thought that was the way to go. The ride we left Atlanta and headed for Jackson, Mississippi. There were 8 of us, I believe, 4 whites and 4 blacks. I was the only black woman. We were not allowed to get off the bus. The bus stopped in Montgomery and Birmingham, and we were not allowed to get off the bus to get a sandwich or to go to the bathroom or anything. And when we got to Jackson, Mississippi, the police and the paddy wagons were waiting. We went right into the white waiting room, and the paddy wagon took us off to the Jackson City jail. I was afraid. It was my first time, I believe. I've been many times now, but I think it was my first time. I was segregated in the jail cell. The mice were running up and down the bars of the jail, and I was in the cell by myself. And the next morning, about 6 o'clock, they came and got us and put us in the paddy wagon and took us to the Hinds County Jail. And at that time, the cell was crowded with black women. There were about 13 or 14 black women in the cell with two cots. And they gave us dirty, filthy mattresses, and we had to sleep on the floor. Picture, my husband took this famous picture of Dr. King in the Birmingham jail. And Dr. King said, "Oh, Wyatt, let me take a picture of you." And that's the legend of the story. Resilience is a trait of black people. You do what you have to do.
Do you feel that you were successful in completing your training?
Yes, but some of the girls in the cell with me had sewn pockets under their skirt, and they had their toothbrushes and things like that. I had nothing but my trench coat, and I used that as a blanket. Everybody, all the women have a story. In that jail cell, the people were from different Mississippi, Louisiana, California. Every one of them had a different story. I didn't think my parents would understand, and they would have worried to death if I had told them I was going. So that's why I didn't tell them. I did write my children a letter while I was in the jail. I don't know where I got the paper from, but I did send them a letter. And I understand from my grandmother, when I did go to visit them, and she told me, she said, "Oh, I was so embarrassed to get a letter with Hines County Jail on it." But I don't know what she thought I did, but we never ever discussed it. My husband, when he was with Dr. King, the board did not want him to have a church. They felt that would detract from his work with the movement. And after 4 years of going through people calling all the time, white people calling and threatening and having to protect your children, we had it. And so someone offered him a job. They said they were selling the Negro Heritage Library. And they came to talk to Dr. King about the books, encyclopedias really. And they said they didn't have anybody black on the board. They just had black salesmen. And they said they couldn't find anybody like you, Wyatt. And so my husband said, "Well, I'll go." And so that's how we ended up in New York. And he had gotten his, he'd gotten his MDiv, Master of Divinity at Virginia Union. And then he was trained, and he was assistant to Adam Clayton Powell. I asked him to fill his pulpit while he was away. And then he was finally called to Canaan Baptist Church, and he accepted. And that's how we got to New York and in the church. Most people that I knew grew up in the church. And so that was like a refuge. When you walk in church, black church, and you're all dressed up and whatnot, you just feel special. And you know that they're going to tell you something about life that will hold you through the week. Well, my husband worked himself to death. He was a true pastor. It was a big church family, and we were like the daddy and the mama, and the church members were all our children. And so he had 4 strokes. He had one that we didn't know. He had one getting ready to do a funeral for a friend of mine. And when he got to the hospital, they found out that he had had a previous stroke that we didn't know anything about. And then that night he had another stroke in the hospital. And back then I had 4 children in 5 years, and so it was kind of hard. I went to church when I could, and the children went to, well, they were small too, but they sang in the little children's choir, directed by Altona Johns, Dr. Vernon Johns' wife. And we were family like then too, but it was different when I got to Canaan in New York, where he pastored for 37 years. Schooled her before homeschooling was popular, and we're proud to say that she finished Howard University, one of the HBCUs, in 3 years, and went on and did a master's at Yale in fine arts. Children needed to know how hard their father worked for them in civil rights, and not to let anybody take advantage of them if they could, and wherever they saw injustice, to stop it. That was one thing that I primarily wanted them to know. And the other thing was just, I wanted them to be healthy and take care of one another, and just to be a family. I did a lot of volunteer work when I was able, and I didn't realize how valuable volunteer work is, or was then. But now that I'm older and I can't do things that I used to do, and I don't know a lot of people because I wasn't able to meet too many people, with my husband being so ill and having to care for him. And that volunteerism is excellent, and Chesterfield has a very good program for seniors.
Wasn't that wonderful? Oh my goodness. Every time I see that video, it just brings tears to my eyes. I think to myself, what a strong woman she is. I am so excited to now introduce you to Reverend Dr. J. Elijah Burke and Belinda Todd, who is going to be moderating this second session. I do want to say, if you have any questions, please go down to the bottom of your screen and you will see Q&A. And that's where you will ask your questions and we will try to answer them as soon as we can. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you, Miss Belinda Todd.
Yes, wasn't that inspiring? My goodness. Hopefully we have Mrs. Walker on with us tonight. And if she would, if Janaea can get her on, and if she'd like to say a few words, we'd love to hear from her. We want to thank her and her family because they have continued through the years to give to the communities, to be active in education and in civic, still engaged in civic activities. Is she available?
We are still looking. If anyone from Mrs. Walker's family is on the Zoom, please just raise your hand or put in the Q&A that you're here. She may have called in, but believe it or not, Mrs. Walker is using her iPad on her own in her home at 93. So let's all take a moment to just celebrate her. Just give her the love that if she's out there, if she's trying, maybe she will see this later. We will send a YouTube link. But again, Mrs. Walker, we are truly thankful for all that you are doing, continue to do, and have done. You're truly a blessing and an inspiration for us all, and you help us really be inspired to disrupt aging, to know that you're using an iPad and you're getting on a Zoom well into your 90s. So thank you, Mrs. Walker, for making the attempt to join us. And if
Janaea, her niece is on, Nancy Walker Hunter. Yes, she's on.
Okay, Mrs. Hunter, I'm going to see if we can bring you in to speak, if you would like to say a few words. Okay, I still don't see her coming through. Oh, I do now. Mrs. Nancy Walker Hunter?
Yes.
Would you like to say hello, or have you spoken to Mrs. Walker today?
Actually, I spoke with her last night for a long time. It had been a while since I talked with her, and we were all very excited in our family to know that AARP sponsored this interview with her. This is an important legacy for our country, for the family, and we are very proud.
Thank you so much. We are truly honored. And again, I will make sure that I will send the YouTube link because we are recording this broadcast and it is on YouTube, which is a little bit friendlier for individuals to just punch and click instead of trying to sign into a Zoom. But again, we thank you. We send our love to your entire family and wish you the best. Thank you.
Well, it is now my pleasure to introduce to our audience the Reverend Dr. J. Elijah Burke. Dr. Burke is a very busy man. He is with the General Convention in Virginia. He's their Director of Health and Wellness, Men and Social Justice. He is an author. He is also a fellow of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University, of which I am also a graduate. I got an MDiv from Virginia Union, and so did the Reverend Dr. Y.T. Walker. So we all have that in common. It's a pleasure having you with us tonight, Dr. Burke.
Thank you. I'm certainly glad to be here.
So, Mrs. Walker was telling us about the things that happened to her as a freedom rider. Now we know that women have always been leaders in the Black church, and that there were many leaders in the civil rights movement, but we don't always hear about that. Why do you think that is?
Well, our church grew out of a very patriarchal tradition where males were traditionally at the head. And some of that comes out of our primary instrument for learning about God in the Baptist tradition in particular, because we're reading a document crafted by males. All the references are male, he, and the people you hear about primarily are men. So we came up in that tradition in a culture that gave men more rights than women, in fact, rights over women for many, many generations. So the church is a part of society, and it really replicates some of those things as it forms. Now, but the reality is women were always a part of every social movement in society, and certainly in the church. So we didn't hear much about it because of who the writer is. So now that more women are writing and telling their story, now with the evolution of feminist and now womanist theology, you're hearing more of the woman's story. And a great delight for many of us is when we came to the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology. That's when we finally got to hear women professors, women preachers, day to day, who were talking about it and who were studying the lives of other women who had been involved in the church, but also in the evolution of our social structures.
Yes. And I also want to say to Mrs. Walker, that I live in Petersburg, Virginia. I'm a member of First Baptist Church, and my pastor, Dr. Jeremiah Tillman, and I believe you know him, Dr. Burke,
Yes, I do.
Was a mentee to Dr. Walker. If we look at the church today, we don't have because we do know that most of the marches, most of the movements concerning civil rights, young people were involved. As we look at these pictures, we see a young Martin, a young Dr. Walker. And the people that we see on our televisions today are young people. But the churches don't necessarily reflect a young population. So how do we train our new leaders? Where are they coming from?
Okay, let's go back and then I'll come back up to that. During the civil rights movement, you often saw children. All right, so you had the preachers preaching what we now know to be a theology of liberation, where we should be free. We should have it all because God put everything here for everybody. So that was what we have always heard from our pulpits. But day to day, women were the ones translating that message to the children in their homes, in their Sunday schools, in their schools. So therefore, you had children involved in the movement. They also were getting the training in many cases to nonviolent resistance. So you had that, and women were a big part of that. But other thing about the Freedom Riders and other groups that came in, whether it was SNCC or other organizations, that these people that were traveling around were major part of them were college students, and none of them were wealthy. They had to eat. Women undergirded the civil rights movement by being those that provided meals for the civil rights leaders and for those traveling through. They also supplied a haven. Remember, in those days, we had very few hotels. They were very small. They housed people when they came through. And of course, they fed many. There are those that there's those that really stopped their jobs or lost their jobs because it was found out that they were feeding the civil rights workers. So young people were there because women, they had a lot of times they had to bring them with them. But now as we come into the movement, we've gone through some social change where young people are no longer forced to go to church or raised up in the church necessarily. Many are not. So the new movement has evolved out of their activism that grew primarily when they were in college. But then again, think about who's teaching them. Most of the professors, and as their parents and grandparents, lived through the civil rights movement. They've always heard stories of the movement. So it's still there. It's just not as apparent because they're not necessarily active in church now. So movements like Black Lives Matter and others I would say they're evolving. Especially after last summer, there are more dialogues going on with that movement and church leaders than before we had everything that happened last summer. So it's happening, but somewhat after the fact. But it was still fed by that because of who their elders are.
Yes, I thought it was very interesting when Mrs. Walker talked about being in jail with women who understood the process and had toothbrushes in the linings of their coats and, you know, their personal supplies. It once again goes back to women are prepared.
Mhm.
And as she said, we are resilient people. What's the Baptist Convention doing these days in terms of social justice and
Okay,
movement?
that's all right. So, you know, I have many jobs, and the social justice piece has become prominent in recent years, simply because of so many things are happening. And one of the things that we can see again through the modern civil rights movement, that we can walk and talk and everything that we do, but nothing really changes for the long term except through policy change.
Mhm.
So what we do is partner with other organizations like the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy and other like-minded groups to make sure that laws are enacted. Through them and other groups, we are part of the groups that meet to shape legislation, to review it, to talk to the legislators, to make sure that they really understand why this particular thing needs to happen. So we're on the advocacy side. We do advocacy for various issues that come up. We do them here in Richmond. We also work with national groups, so we do advocacy days in DC. So we're always trying to make sure that people are taken care of in terms of health. And of course, now the wage struggle, you know, and we've expanded Medicaid. Now we've got to get people to understand how to access it. So any issue that affects our people, it's on our agenda. And for me, that I was sort of unusual at the time I went to seminary, because I was the only male in my class back in the day whose aim wasn't to run straight to a pulpit. I was focused in Christian education, and what's more, you educate people to understand that it's their role to do what Jesus did. Feed, clothe people, take care of people, make sure that people are treated justly. So that was where I developed the model that I wrote about in my book. Because as I believe that if we get it right, and the civil rights leaders understood that if you really are going to follow a Christian model, then it always has to be people first and the care of people.
Absolutely. Now, I want to offer the opportunity to our audience. If you have some questions, then we would love to hear from you. Here's a question for you, sir. Do you think the techniques used to teach nonviolence to the Freedom Riders could be taught to today's youth to learn how to de-escalate anger? They could learn from history and the ability to draw upon self-control. What say ye?
Some of that is happening, but we need more of that, because once our people start responding in anger, you have to get them to a point of really listening to hear that message and understand it. So the foundational piece is we still have to help them to understand how the civil rights movements in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, how they happened, and I think now it might be a little easier because now they see that they don't have the firepower and certainly don't have the legal power to deal with these over-militarized police departments we have. Because we've seen, they don't hesitate to call out the National Guard. So I think the young people have seen that. So I think now is sort of a good time for our churches and our organizations that serve to really reach out to the young people, invite them to forums to be heard, and then ask if they will listen to our methodology based on our years of experience in dealing with authority that does not respect Black lives.
Yes, absolutely. Your book, you did mention it. Will you tell us a little bit about, I know you've got several publications, but you do have a book.
The book wound up being called Faith Beyond the Pews.
Yeah.
And so, because I believe that that's where it happens. It happens out in the street and in the neighborhoods, wherever you go. But the book grew out of my doctoral work. My doctoral work was based in the whole idea that you use your Christian education to teach these principles of social action, and then you create an instrument for them to do it. And when I was a Christian ed director at 6 Mount Zion in Richmond, I had 31 ministries. They were all required to have some type of sustainable outreach in the community. So I took that model, and it's all based on my understanding of the gospel, that it's not real until it touches somebody. And so with Faith Beyond, so it became Faith Beyond the Pews, and when I finally put it in book form.
Yes, and you do a lot of speaking and leadership type workshops for churches as well.
Yes, I do, and for Virginia. Yes, for Virginia Union's Evan Smith Institute, I think these past 2 years, I've taught social justice and advocacy in the Black church, and it's sort of gaining in popularity. So and we look at the history of the church and its involvement. And then one of the things about Evan Smith, the people don't have to be in seminary. They can be, just interested and come and take the courses. So through that, and we're getting our people already pastoring in that thought, because they see Black Lives Matter, usually that's the starting point for them to understand that movement and how it really builds upon previous movements, and how no movement is perfect. But there's still room for everybody to be a part of shaping it, because it's still young, still new.
Yes. Dr. Burke, we have a question from a Miss Laverne Davis. She says, thank you for an outstanding session this evening. My question, have you had dialogue with the founders of Black Lives Matter and offered any training to the activists?
I personally did not, but the Ministers' Conference of Richmond and vicinity, and I'm sure some others around the country may have too, but after the things that were happening last summer, as an organization, there was a series of dialogues that went on with the leaders in Central Virginia, and it still continues. It's not as often as it was right after, but there is some dialogue going on among clergy and the leaders in Central Virginia, and I believe in other parts of the country.
Let's turn our attention back to women. Even in the news in this last few days, we have seen many of our women in Congress. Stacey Abrams is being attacked. So women are really making themselves, are taking a stand for justice right now. And as we've talked about, they have always taken a stand. But I think that we get to see it more today. And of course, with the technology. Do you think these women are being unfairly treated in the press?
Absolutely, they are. I mean, when women, particularly Black women, have always been scrutinized and treated differently from others, simply because they were not viewed as valuable traditionally. And now that they have sort of stepped to the front educationally, in terms of achievements in politics and other areas, they kind of can't be denied. And that's very intimidating to a lot of people, because people in Georgia just believed that Sister Abrams was down for the count. Then she came back and just turned everything around. And so, that's an example of the power of a resolute woman. So we have to look back, going all the way back to Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. We always had those women that were not going to be denied when they knew they were right throughout history. So I'm glad those stories are coming forth. And I'm glad now that when women like Abrams and others, and when Maxine Waters has been attacked viciously this week for her stance on things. So I'm glad that we're seeing more of the brothers step up in defense and in partnership. And before I forget, I have to say that Dr. Wyatt T. Walker influenced many of us in our journeys in ministry, and it shaped what came from the pulpits, and also shaped our involvement in organizations supporting our people. So proud that he is my fraternity brother. And so we are very proud of all that he's accomplished, and many of us really have always been motivated by his work. So we'll thank Mrs. Walker for you and your family.
Absolutely. I was a young girl when the Walkers were at Guildfield Baptist here in Petersburg, but he had such a huge reputation. Even before leaving him, he was known as a pastor among pastors. And then when he left, people were so saddened by that. But then, we heard such wonderful things about him in New York. And as he went on to move around the country, as a
Yes.
leader and activist. Talking about women a little bit more, the leaders of Black Lives Matter, the founders, Opal Tometi and Patrice Cullis and Alice Garza. Now, one of these ladies, I believe it was Oprah, was recently, some very bad press came out about her and the money spent. And from what my research showed me is that there was no basis for it. And so it kind of goes to show us that if people can't, they will make up stuff in order to smear you if you're standing for what you know is right, and if you're doing the right thing, you know, they will still attack you with the untruth. So you know, it's just a lot to deal with, and it causes you, I'm sure it will cause you to question, do I really want to take such a stand?
Right. And part of the preparation is to help people coming in to activism to know that you will always be a target.
Yeah.
There will always be someone, and the hard part is sometimes that the seed for that might even come from within. But either way, you will be challenged in various ways, which is why there needs to be a support system, somewhere that people can go to vent and share, and also to benefit from other people's experiences.
We must always carry ourselves upright. I mean, we always have to be very careful in our walk. I see that we have, I don't know if this is a relative of Mrs. Walker's who's on. I see Aunt Ann Walker. Is this someone who'd like to say something? And if so, you can unmute. And Ann Walker, would you like to say something? There is one of our, from YouTube, Carolyn McCreary. Mrs. Walker is an inspiration to me. Thank you for showing the video. Yes, she is. She had 4 children, and that's the beauty of women, right? I mean, we hold careers, we volunteer, we work in the church, we're mothers, wives, and still we rise to do all those other things out in our communities.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I just offer women just a big, and now to be having to work at home with children, it's we see on television some of the very funny things that happen. It's just remarkable. Janaea, do we have somebody who'd like to talk?
Yes, I'm going to assume and try to see, is Mrs. Walker, are you on the line? You can unmute yourself. Hello? We might be experiencing some technical difficulties, but we will go ahead and see if we can try to bring her in a little bit later. But this is a wonderful discussion, Mrs. Todd and Dr. Burke. Again, we are just getting some more questions coming in from YouTube. To our YouTube audience, thank you for joining us. And also, please continue to put in your questions on YouTube or on Facebook, and we will try to address them live. So I'll continue to try to bring in Mrs. Walker. Thank you, Belinda.
You know, today at Virginia Union University, there are some outstanding women in the, especially I know them from the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology. Outstanding teachers, they pastor churches, and they can preach. Some sisters who can really preach. Can you talk about any of them and some of the work they're doing now? Because I know that everybody at Virginia Union is involved in some way or another with social justice.
Well, one of my great influences from my years, and I remember I did 2 degrees. I did MDiv and the Doctor of Ministry. And Dr. Patricia Gould-Champ was instrumental in both of those. She was my first seminary professor, and she also was a person that supervised my doctoral studies. And so, and we still are very connected. And she is an example. When she did start the church, she started the church specifically to serve the community where it's located in Churchill. So it's specifically to meet the social needs of the people in that community. So you see people. One of the unique things about the School of Theology is, well, till very recent years, most of the instructors and professors actually did have churches, were actively involved in churches. So they basically had a place to practice what they preached. And so I think Dr. Patricia Gould-Champ and the things that she has accomplished, not only at the school, but the first woman female president of the Baptist General Commission of Virginia, and many other accomplishments, and is still on the case. And in fact, I recently joined the board of directors of one of her new nonprofit that she started.
All right, and let's see if we can get Mrs. Walker on now. I see the hand raised. If you will unmute yourself, you can speak.
No, kid, this is Maxie. This is Aunt Ann's nephew. Can you unmute her? Can you unmute her line?
We can hear you.
Yeah, you can hear me. I'm in New York, but my aunt's down there in Virginia. So we set it up and she's online, but I think she can hear us, but she's probably trying to talk. But can you unmute from your end, her line, so that she can speak? Do you follow me?
She on a phone or on Zoom?
I'm just cutting in the other. We have two boxes that say Aunt Ann Walker, and both of them are unmuted at this time.
Hey, Aunt Ann, can you hear us? Can you say something?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I'm sure the video is over, but I would just like to say hello to everybody. And here's hoping the presentation has helped you learn something about the women freedom riders. And
it certainly has.
Thank you for watching.
We're inspired by you, Mrs. Walker.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad I was able to do whatever I could do. All of the freedom riders have a story to tell.
Yes, yes.
You have seen mine, I believe.
We have. Let me ask you a question, Mrs. Walker. What do you think that churches, congregations can do today to encourage people, young people even, to get involved in their communities and what's happening?
Well, I think like showing the video, if they can show the video and learn just exactly what we did and what we went through, perhaps that will encourage the young people and older people too to participate.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us?
Well, I'm sorry, I missed seeing the video. There was a problem with my computer here, okay. But I'm just so glad everybody was able to see it.
Good. Yes, we did. And we enjoyed it so much. I thought it was a really sweet love story too.
Well, it was a love story.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. We have another question in our chat. Let's see. Someone wants to know, Dr. Burke, they'd like to get your view on perhaps boycotting Georgia as a result of the new voter suppression law. This law, as we all know, violates the 14th and the 15th Amendments and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. As goes Georgia, then you know what's going to happen. Other states will try it as well.
South, that's right. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, historically, you get people's attention when you start to impact the money, as in the Montgomery boycott. What really made it work is when they realized we can't be viable as businesses without these people. And once they stopped buying from them, start riding in their buses and all that, they felt it. In Georgia, some of that's happening with some of the conferences and other things that are not coming to the state. And I think when it starts hitting more locally, they will realize that and so, unfortunately, you can't depend on people having a moral fortitude to do what's right. Sometimes you have to hit them in the pocketbook And so I believe it'll continue to build momentum as more business entities and sports teams and other, and as artists who do major concerts and movie studios stop bringing things there. I think they're onto something. As it builds, I think it'll force some change.
I was a Delta Airlines employee for many years. I was very happy to see the president of Delta come out to say, we won't support you on this. So that was good. And I believe that others will follow, because you're right. When it hits your pocketbook, it makes a difference. It makes a difference. Let's see. For those of you who want to subscribe to AARP and ASALH Richmond YouTube channels, you can watch future Sunday sit-ins as well as replay and share today's discussions. All right, let's see if there's some more questions here. Here's one from Eva Callum, I believe. Women take on so many roles and still have to deal with issues of health and other life issues. What are some unconventional advocacy actions that can be taken at the local level for issues important to Black women in particular, especially if accessibility is an issue, that is, cannot go in person to your legislative office? So I guess she's saying, what are some unconventional advocacy actions that we can take at times like these?
All right, one of the things that people often miss, and in advocacy work, we tend to think of it as only being about the people that can actually show up, because the general populace can never really show up at the state legislature. Not everybody can go to Washington and talk to legislators. So support groups that do that. So one of the major things that we do to shape the ideas and the thoughts of the legislators is make sure that people participate in letter writing campaigns. Nowadays, most of those campaigns are automated. So you can join any list. There's a long list of groups that asking people just to sign off on this letter saying we support a $15 minimum wage, or we support maternal health. There are even some that are going to foundations saying you need to give money, in particular to Black maternal health, because that we have serious issues there. But so support those agencies through letter campaigns, and also during especially as we get towards the more political parts of the year. One of the things that we do in some of these organizations is ask people to submit a brief 3-minute, 5-minute video talking about how you're impacted by various issues, so that legislators are forced to hear from you. When they get 300, 500 letters from somebody saying, look, this is how I'm impacted by minimum wage, they have no choice but to listen eventually.
Absolutely. And you know what? You can't do anything about anything if all you do is post on Facebook and it's not going to your representative.
That's right. And give to these organizations. Some of them asking for $1, $2, $3, or $5. But that adds up if you got 10,000 people.
That exactly. Mrs. Walker, if you're still with us, someone wants to know how you stay active, how you look so good at this age, and what we're impressed with your computer skills. So what kinds of things do you do today to stay active and fit and looking so well?
Well, before the pandemic set in, I did yoga. I did an exercise using a hula hoop as a prop. I took a line dancing class, and our teacher was 96. I'm 93. I took, I tried to stay active. I took an exercise class, and I took jujitsu.
Yes.
So, yeah, but I tell people, when I was a child growing up, every day my mother gave me a taste of cod liver oil for breakfast after I ate my breakfast before I went to school. And I think that had a lot to do with it. I hated it with a passion, but I think that had a lot to keep me.
Thank you. Well, whatever you're doing, just keep on doing it. Keep on doing it. You know, our time is getting away from us, and we do have some announcements before we leave today. Dr. Burke, is there anything else you'd like to say? You have been wonderful. We thank you so much for being here and being able to answer all of our questions. Any parting words?
Well, stay awake, stay aware, and support wherever you can.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm going to introduce to you now Dr. Cassandra Boyd Willis.
Well, I just want to close us down today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us with our sit-in. As I said last time, sit-ins have been used in our communities to pass on information. So we are ever so grateful for the powerful information. When Mrs. Walker came on live, I was screaming behind my computer. We are honored to have you sit in with us, Mrs. Walker. I'm so emotional right now because the stories just bring us life. Those of us who are frustrated, right? Those of us who are trying to work in our communities, to hear your story gives us life. It gives me that inspiration, that motivation to continue the fight. I wrote my master's thesis at the University of Virginia on the role of women in the civil rights movement. So certainly to sit here with someone with all of this wisdom I am just humbled. As Reverend Burke said, churches have had men at the forefront historically. However, women have been active all along because what? We get stuff done. You know, often people use the phrase Black girl magic, but I take a little bit of issue with that because we aren't magic. Magic implies that it's an anomaly, a rarity, something that just falls from the sky. But as we listen to Miss Walker, we know that isn't so. It isn't so. We're not magic, we're intelligent, we're educated, we're wise, we're poised, we're graceful, we're resourceful, and as Ms. Walker said, we are resilient. That's who Ms. Walker is, and that is who we are as women. So again, thank you for joining us, and thank you, Belinda Todd, for doing such a wonderful job moderating this for us, and Reverend Burke for your wisdom, your intelligence, and all the work you have done in the Christian and Baptist community in the area. A special thank you.
One quick thing. I'm sorry, please forgive me, but I do see that a young lady who loves Mrs. Walker is on, Dr. Reverend Sherry Austin from Atlanta, Georgia. She just wants to let you know that she acknowledges your presence and how wonderful you are. I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Dr. Boyd.
Mrs.
That's
Walker,
okay.
would you like to close us out with any words, Mrs. Walker?
Well, just thank you so much to AARP for spreading the word. And the women will continue to be active and not only support the men, but the men will support us.
Yes, yes. Absolutely. Don't forget, everyone, this is just the second in our series. So certainly if you were here for the first two webinars, you do not, and I mean, I will repeat, you do not want to miss the last two. We talked about land, we've talked about women in advocacy, and so we're going to talk next about multi-generational caregiving, and our own current ASALH treasurer, Courtney Quarles-Bird, will be there with her mother, Marlo Quarles, and her grandmother, Esther Quarles. So we're going to have 3 generations. And then in June, we're going to close down with our final sit-in with our ASALH member, Dr. Carmen Foster. Now, she is a historian, and if you have never heard Dr. Foster tell a story about Richmond, then you are in for a treat. She will offer a glimpse into the Teachers in the Movement project, which has some great video clips, and you just might see a few teachers you recognize. Again, thank you, all of you, for joining us, and thank you so much, Ms. Walker. We pay homage to you, and we are blessed to be in your presence on this evening. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.